When you're anchored to the mission of the parish, when you know what your pastor is trying to build, what the parish is moving toward, and what the next 12 months are supposed to produce, you have a filter for your decisions. You shouldn't need to ask whether the idea is okay because our direction, our process, how we're doing it is already laid out and defined. So you ask instead of permission, you ask whether it serves the mission. If it does, you can move. If it doesn't, you set it aside. And then your pastor doesn't need to make that call. You do. If you work for the Catholic Church and want to reclaim time for discipleship, we are here to help. I'm John Kahns, and this is the Catholic Ministry Professionals Podcast, your favorite leadership development podcast for Catholic churches. Listen, in your ministry, there's something that you already know needs to happen. You've known for a while, you've thought through the idea, you've even maybe seen it work somewhere else, and you believe that it would work here in your parish, but for various reasons, you haven't moved. You're waiting. You're waiting for the right moment, the right meeting, the right opportunity to talk to Father, the right signal from the pastor that it's okay to go. Today, we're going to talk about why that permission might never be coming and what to do instead. So here's what permission waiting looks like in practice. You have this idea. Maybe it's a new small group, but whatever it is, you sketch it out. You think through the details. And then you wait. You wait till the next staff meeting. You wait until you can get 5 minutes with the pastor, or you wait until the calendar clears, because waiting feels safe, right? It's a place you can be where you're like, yes, Lord, I'm striving. I want to do this thing. But while you're waiting, one of two things probably happens. Either the idea just kind of quietly dies. You just lose momentum. Something else takes precedent, we move into the next liturgical season, and then the idea never gets brought up again. Or the other thing that might happen is you do bring it up to your pastor, and he says, let me think about it, and then you're just back to waiting again. And the problem isn't that our pastor is a roadblock. Some are, but most aren't. The problem is that you've built your leadership around a question you were never supposed to keep asking. And that question is it okay if blank? Is it okay if I start this? Is it okay if I try this? Is it okay if ... And that question does have a place in ministry and in the hierarchy of the church, in budget decisions, major programming shifts, anything that would touch the whole parish. Yeah, absolutely. You should bring it to the pastor, have a few conversations. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is the ministry leader who can't send this email to this parishioner, can't send out the next newsletter without Father say so, can't recruit a volunteer unless Father gives the okay, can't adjust their meeting agenda or a meeting time without first checking in, a meeting that falls under their specific ministry that Father doesn't need to be to. This person who has quietly handed over their judgment to whoever has the title, and that might be the pastor, it might be a pastoral associate, it might be the deacon, but either way, they've abdicated their decision making, they've abdicated their leadership as deference, right? They've just dressed it up as that, and that's not true humility. What that is just choosing not to take ownership, and it is costing your parish probably more than you realize, and that's because every time you wait for permission that you don't need, the mission is put on hold. It's waiting for you. And so I want to talk about 3 things that we can do. If this is you, if you feel like you're constantly waiting for permission for the next decision that needs to be made, the next thing that you can do, we're going to talk about 3 things. And they are to know what you own, to move with the mission, and then to report, not request. If you bring these 3 things into your leadership rhythm, then waiting becomes more moving. You gain momentum. You get the permission to move forward. So the first thing is just to know what you own, right? And every role in parish ministry comes with kind of a lane. Like these are the things that are under your purview, right? And the problem is that most parish staff were never told, though, where their lane starts and ends. What are the boundaries of my decision-making abilities? So they default to asking permission for everything, including the things that were already theirs to decide. Think about your job description for a second. not the official one, you like your HR file, which if you've been in ministry for a few years, things get added to your plate, but your job description never gets updated, so you end up having a job that's much bigger than when you started. But if you look at your file and what you're actually supposed to do, what you were hired to do, it's changed, right? I want to look at the job description that describes what you do when you show up Monday morning, Tuesday morning, right? Somewhere in that description is probably a set of decisions that belong to you. Who you recruit for your ministry, right? How you're going to structure your meetings, what resources you use, how you communicate with volunteers. These are things that you own, right? These are things that are under yours, and you shouldn't need a green light necessarily to move on any one of them. And I'm thinking about in the past when I've been a DRE and working in a parish, and the standard parish website was not using best practices. It didn't look modern. It looked like it was put together in the early 2000s, maybe the late 90s. But I wanted to be able to onboard people into my program using Google Forms, but we didn't even own the rights to go in and edit our website. And I said, I'm not going to work like this. It's going to slow everything down. So I went ahead and created my own formation website. I did let the pastor know what I was about to do, but I went ahead and created it, and that allowed me to have the freedom to be able to create systems and processes that allowed my ministry to flourish. Now, here's where these things can break down, right? When the lane is never clearly defined and everything starts to feel like it needs approval. So the DRE, right, that's running the faith formation for 8 years still feels like they have to ask the pastor if it's okay to change room set up for a parent meeting, to move things around, or the youth minister who knows his teenagers better than anyone in the building, but they're waiting 3 weeks to hear back before they book a speaker, or they buy a new set of resources to walk through as a Bible study, not because they're incapable, but because nobody ever told them clearly, like, hey, this is yours. You need to lead it. So the first move is simple, but it's not necessarily easy. It's to sit down and kind of draw the line, write out the decisions that you make regularly and sort them into 2 columns, right? Decisions that are mine and decisions that need input. Not every decision is going to benefit from input, but some of the decisions that actually require it, and that might be budget approvals, things like that. So you'll find that the second column is usually shorter than you think, right? You don't necessarily need input for all of these little mundane decisions. So know what you own, and then you have to choose to lead like you own it. And that takes a personal decision to act and make decisions with confidence, knowing kind of where the lines are. And that moves us into the second thing. The second thing is to move with the mission, right? To know what's underneath a lot of the permission waiting that nobody talks about. It's not always about authority, like Father has to make all these decisions. Sometimes it's just about uncertainty. I'm not sure what to do. I'm not sure if my idea fits into where the parish is going, or what Father has planned for Advent, or what he has planned for Lent. Right? So instead of making the call, we outsource it, or we bring it to him, not because it needs his permission, but just because we're not confident enough in our own read of the direction to move with it. And that's a different problem, and it has a different solution. So when you're anchored to the mission of the parish, when you know what your pastor is trying to build, what the parish is moving toward, and what the next 12 months are supposed to produce, you have a filter for your decisions. You shouldn't need to ask whether the idea is okay, because our direction, our process, how we're doing it is already laid out and defined. So you ask, instead of permission, you ask whether it serves the mission. If it does, you can move. If it doesn't, you set it aside. And then your pastor doesn't need to make that call. You do. And this is why vision isn't just a leadership buzzword. This is why vision is a decision-making tool. A staff that shares a clear, common understanding of where the parish is going doesn't need to check in before every move, because they already are thinking in the same direction, and the mission becomes the permission. So if you find yourself waiting constantly, ask an honest question. Do I know where this parish is trying to go? Not the mission statement on the wall, the real answer. What is my pastor trying to build? What does winning look like in the next year? And if you can answer those, you have a really clear rubric to make decisions. If you can answer it clearly, then you have more freedom to move than you'll ever be using, right? If you can't answer that question, right, that's the conversation then that you need to have with the pastor. Not, can I do this? But help me understand where we're going and why so that I can lead my ministry in that direction, knowing that it's in line with you as pastor who God has placed here in our parish. I want to know that I'm in line with what God is doing here. And that's a conversation that almost every pastor wants to have, is dying to have, plus their own desire just to not have to make every decision. You'll be doing them a favor. And that leads to then the third thing that you can do if you find yourself waiting for a lot of permission. This is where this moving past waiting becomes really practical, because you've identified what you owned. You've anchored yourself to the mission, to the vision. Now you need to change the way you communicate with your pastor, because the language shapes the dynamic that you're living in. So most permission waiting sounds like this. Father, I was thinking about maybe doing a small group series this fall. Would that be okay? Now that phrasing hands the decision to him before you've even made it yourself. You're not leading. It sounds like you're not even sure that this is what you should be doing. You're proposing, and you're putting your pastor in the position of approving or rejecting something you should have already decided. Jocko Willink wrote a book. He's a former Navy SEAL commander and author of The Extreme Ownership. And he writes about a phrase that his teams used to break this pattern. Instead of asking for approval, they would say, I intend to blank. I intend to move the squad into the next position. I intend to begin the operation at 0600. This phrase does something very specific. It communicates the plan, it signals confidence, and it gives the leader the chance to redirect without requiring him to make a decision for you. And this can work the same way in a parish. This is a great way to phrase your next communications. Father, I intend to launch a small group series this fall. Here's the format. Here's who I'm recruiting to lead it, and here's how it connects to what we talked about for this year. Let me know if you see any conflicts. So that's not insubordination, right? That's actually just a really clear decision. It's an intention, right? And it's leadership. You've done the thinking, you've made the call, and you're giving the pastor the information he needs to shepherd the process, but not to have to carry it for you. So this shift from can I to I intend to is small in words, but it's really significant in what it does for the posture of the conversation and the communication. It tells your pastor that you can be trusted with the lane that you've been given. And over time, that trust, it will compound, right? The staff leader who reports instead of requests is the one who gets handed more responsibility, because they've demonstrated they can handle what they've already got. So, and here's a little aside, right? And if you're the pastor listening to this, here's what this might look like from your side of the desk. Your staff isn't going to necessarily just make the shift on their own if they've never been told that it's safe to. So the fastest way to build a team that moves without waiting is to share the vision explicitly, right? To give them language, a shared language for the mission that they can actually use in their decisions. And the second piece of that is, once you've got the vision very clearly stated, to build a meeting rhythm where they report what they're doing, not ask what they should do. You don't have to relinquish control. You have to redistribute it. And there's a very key difference in that. All right. And before we get to the devil's advocate, I want us to just briefly sit with one verse. And that's from Matthew chapter 25, verse 25. And it's about the servant who was given the one talent. And he looks at his master when his master returns, and he says, I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Now, he didn't lose the talent. He didn't misuse it. He buried it out of fear, right? That's what permission waiting costs, and that's often what's behind it. It's not a dramatic failure. It's just a talent in the ground. It's an idea that never moved. It's a ministry that just never launched. It's a person who never got served, right? And it's because we are sometimes afraid to act without someone telling us that it's okay, right? God has called us into this work. He has called you into this work. You need to trust that he is in work in you and to act. And with that, I think it's time for the devil's advocate. So here's the objection that I hear most often when this conversation comes up. John, you don't know my pastor. The last time I moved without checking in, it didn't go well. He's unpredictable, he's territorial, and if I do what you're describing, there will be consequences. So I hear that, and I'm not going to tell you that every pastor is easy to work with because it's just not true. Some pastors are really insecure. They're people, right? And insecurity in a person with authority can make them a little more volatile, right? A little harder to connect with, a little harder to move the ball with. And that's a separate conversation. But what I don't want is for a difficult pastor to become the reason that you stop developing as a leader. Because here's what happens when you let that dynamic run long enough is that you shrink. You get smaller and smaller until you're not leading anything. You begin to cover your light with a bushel basket. You become a person who's just managing tasks and waiting to be told what to do next. And the parish loses what God put inside you to share. The I intend to framework isn't about going rogue. It's not about doing things without letting Father know. It's about communicating clearly, keeping your pastor informed, and leading with confidence inside the work that you do. A reasonable pastor, even a demanding one, responds well to a staff member who is competent, confident, communicates proactively, and stays anchored to the mission. All right. So if that's still not enough, if you're doing all of that and the environment is still hostile to you, then what you need isn't a better communication strategy. You need a conversation, and that's exactly what a discovery call is for. So feel free to reach out. And of course, we never want to leave you without some action that you can take based on our conversation today. So this week, write down 3 decisions that you've been waiting on. Just put them down on paper, things sitting in like your mental queue that haven't moved. And for each one, ask honestly, does this require my pastor's input or another person on the staff? Or am I just waiting out of habit? Pick one and then move on it by Friday, before Friday, right? The second thing you can do is to share this episode with your pastor or a friend in ministry and start the conversation today. And finally, if you want help turning clarity into action, you can book a discovery call at catholicministryprofessionals.com/contact. Thank you for listening to this episode. If it was useful, don't let it be just another good idea. And with that, we'll see you in the vineyard.